The Game Schooler podcast is a weekly audio show that educates new and experienced gamers about the awesomeness of tabletop gaming. In this week's episode, we'll cover Spotlight, our game of the week, discuss Game Schooler media in the School of Gaming, and wrap it up by revealing our high 5 best inserts with a special guest. Welcome to the Game Schooler podcast. I'm your host, Doug Kotecki, along with my co-host, the esteemed Dr. Michael McCabe. How's it going, Michael?
What's happening, Doug? How are you?
I am doing great.
Man, kind of a teaser. Who's our guest? You're not going to tell people? You're just going to make people wait?
Well, I waited. They listened to the intro. Now they're here, so I think that's enough waiting, right?
Okay, I agree. Yeah, I'm excited.
Right, so we're going to have Dan Cunningham help out with this list of our high 5 best inserts. Dan is a world-renowned insert designer. Is kind of his specialty in the world of gaming. And so what better person to help highlight some of the awesome inserts that have been made. And we told him only that he couldn't pick his own designs.
Yeah.
Was the only caveat. So
he just happens to be our friend and in our game group. So it is a small world. And it was on, I believe, in episode 111. We interviewed him all the way back then. So if any of our listeners hear us refer to Dan, that's the person. You'll get to see him over on YouTube. And I'm looking forward to that high 5 to see what he has.
Yeah, that's the Dan we refer to. Follow-up from last week. My parents do not listen to the podcast, or at least they haven't.
Shame on them.
They have no idea what they're missing. But they did watch the Reiner Knizia interview.
Okay.
And then I forced them to subscribe to the YouTube channel against their will. And apparently last week my mom convinced my dad, we should probably listen to that. And my parents are not gamers. However, they did make a point to tell me that they're still playing bingo with their grandchildren and giving out prizes. So
big time gamers.
I shared a story last week about growing up and some of the memories that we made, and they wanted to make sure that it's still happening. Of course, not with 40-year-old boxes of cereal and the prizes that come with them. I'm assuming it's some sort of dollar store type trinkets. But a couple of months they did play bingo with some of the grandchildren, and are still creating those type of memories. So.
That's great.
They made a point to tell me that they turned it off as soon as we started talking about games. So,
they listened to the opening segment.
Yeah, they're here for the intro.
Once we got to the Spotlight series, gone.
No, I don't need. They didn't need to hear about Arnak. So I wanted to share that. Some other follow up, just in case people don't know, big box stores are still carrying actual hobby games.
Oh yes.
And Michael put a picture up in the Discord server about that. So I want to make that clear. The point of last week's segment was just to temper our expectations on them morphing into full-blown local game stores.
Yeah. Well, and also to acknowledge that we had that moment in time where there was a lot of hobby games coming in and out of big box stores.
It seemed like it was happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then one other follow-up kind of item that I've got is I had an experience the other night where my youngest daughter wanted to play a game, and I wanted to try and rope some more family members into it and get my other daughter to play. And I ended up, and she's older, so it's straddling that line of pulling out a kid's game that the youngest is really going to love, and the oldest is going to be bored, and trying to find that middle ground. And I picked out Llama, and I'm like, well, this will be a good one to introduce her to, and the older one will enjoy it. And it did not go over well, Michael. And it was a good lesson on the idea of, instead of playing the games that we want to play what our child wants to play.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of, it was my mistake on trying to bridge the gap and trying to get more people involved, which was the game that I picked out. I should have just said, all right, let's play the game with the youngest and go from there and have that experience. Because she went from being excited to playing games to crying, running away from the table because, she was getting points and she didn't want to get points and all the stuff that happens when you game with a 6-year-old.
Yeah.
But I just thought that's a kind of a gentle reminder to not always, and it's not that I wanted to play Llama, or I was like, oh, I've got this new hotness. It's called Llama. Let's play it. But just being
from 2019.
Just being more aware of, if your kid's reaching out to play with you, maybe sometimes you got to play the things that you're personally bored with.
Well, I think that's it's a great point. I would say, I don't see a mistake in intent. Yes, the outcome didn't happen, but I would imagine most of our listeners who are listening, who are also parents or aunts and uncles, have run into a very similar type of experience. Right now, in this very house right above me, on the floor, is Candyland. And I saw it today. I walked by and I thought, oh my goodness, I hope that my kids are playing that with their dolls. I hope that when I get done recording the podcast, I'm able to make dinner and not asked if I want to play a game. Because when you are the co-host of the Game Schooler podcast, there is an obligatory answer when one of your own children says, Dad, do you want to play a game?
I believe it is yes.
Yes, thank you. It is.
Sure.
So it's that fine line, and you don't always know until sometimes it's too late is this the moment to introduce a new game? I think you might like this one.
Yeah.
It's worked. Hey, it's worked for other families. And then all of a sudden you're in that moment of tears. Yeah. It's like, maybe we should have just played the game that you wanted to play. It's a challenge. We basically keep I don't want to call it a kid's shelf, but we have this shelf in our living room. It's really become my youngest game shelf, essentially is what it is. And we try to rotate games through, but I've had that exact same thing happen, what you've described, sometimes on a Friday night, sometimes on a Saturday morning. That happens. Yeah.
Well, and we've talked before too. It's like you never know the amount of variables that go into, was it a little bit too late? Should I have done it? She asked me right after school. It's like, well, I got to finish work and, you clean up dinner and then, all right, now we've got time. And did you push it too far? And now, now you're getting into exhaustion. You didn't pick the right thing. The older sister's doing better. There's so many things. And then one of the other participants is getting really invested in it.
Yeah.
And you're just like, I want to keep this going because it's working over here, but not working over there. And just kind of weird things that I don't think our hobby talks about enough of the maneuvering of actually playing games and the social experiences as opposed to this game was good or this game was bad. There's so much more that goes on around it that rarely gets discussed.
Well, and you do a good job of highlighting the variables that are coming from your children, right? Right after school, tired, hungry, potentially this, potentially that. You're trying to get work done. But then the other variables, and some of it you just see on our Discord, or you hear about, oh, well, if this person is playing games with their 6 or 7-year-old, clearly my 6 or 7-year-old can handle it as well. And whether those are conscious or unconscious, and I'm not saying this is you. I'm not saying you had this at all. But this is something that I know I've run into is, oh, well, I saw, so-and-so was playing Everdell with their 8-year-old. I'll get that out to the table and we'll get it going. And then you just see that realization of, oh, my kid does not want to read the text on that card and try to figure out where to go, So
well, and I think there's also the idealist mindset of a gamer that when you have kids that you assume that once they're all 8 years old or older, once they're all 10 or older, like we're going to be able to just sit down and play and we're going to have regular game nights. And
well, Board Game Geeks has A+, Doug.
Yeah, but not all of my kids love board games in the same way. Yeah. And their abilities are different and what they enjoy is different. And so it's like I feel like sometimes you as gamers, we get this idea of like, oh, it'll be so ideal. Everybody will love it. And it's like, yeah, I can do that with one of my daughters. And the other daughter, there's a very specific genre of games that she may play when she's in the mood. And the other one is on a completely different, spectrum of what games they like to play. So I think that's what makes it hard. But in our minds, we have this Norman Rockwell of like, well, we're just going to sit down and we're going to huddle up and play Catan, and it's going to be magical. And it's like, that day may never come.
But what contributes to that Norman Rockwell-esque family that plays games together once or twice a year, and maybe it's just me, but I'll have that experience where a kid really surprises me. Like, Dad, I want to play a game. And next thing you know, like, hey, we're playing Clank. I didn't see that one coming. That was a blast. Yeah. You just get like one or two of those. That's interesting.
So what do you have? Any follow-up for you?
I don't have any follow-up from last week. That was just excellent to hear about the Koteki parents next door watching us on YouTube. That just warms my heart. No, the only thing that I have, it's kind of about what's awesome with games. We've had a number of games that are now in steady rotation, and they're not the same games from a year ago or 2 years ago. And I'm enjoying that, and they are from the most recent Gen Con or right around that time, Kabanga, Trio, Sausage Sizzle, and just not that I've enjoyed that. And it's not that they're the newness or the hotness, but it is just nice to get different titles in and out and seeing my wife, my kiddo having a good time playing those games. And so that's been awesome. And it's a busy season. Fall is a very busy season in our house. And that games that we can get played in 15 to 20 minutes that have a simple rule set that are enjoyed by an 8-year-old and to people in their middle 40s, that can be played on the floor. We've just had a good time the last few weeks doing that. And so nothing specific to highlight other than just it's been fun to get some of those newer games into the rotation, I guess.
Yeah, awesome. So for me, I've got two things that I wanted to highlight. One of them is, even though the gameplay experience was a debacle, I was reminded of, and I not to be outdone with props and visual cues, so go over to the YouTube. There are some devices for little hands and holding cards. So GameRight makes this the original little hands card holder, which we have. But the other night when we were playing Llama, I set up, I don't even know where I got these, but these are like little card trays, and they're very modular, cool. So you can make them into a big long one or a couple small ones, things like that. Uberstacks.com is what it says on the back. I believe I got this for some sort of demo or something. I did not go to Uberstacks.com, so I can't vouch for the authenticity of that website. But
someplace in the dark web.
Yeah, exactly. But I did want to highlight that as if you are playing with younger gamers and you're playing games like Bonanza or things like that, there are a lot. I looked on Amazon. There's a bunch of different card holders and card, just little stands that you can put cards in. So if that's something that you didn't even know existed, or you think that your kids might benefit from that, though they are out there, and it really does come in handy. I remember I used to play card games with my grandma every once in a while when she would babysit me, and she'd get out. That's when they had like the 5-inch phone books, that were thick. Now if you get one, it's basically a one sheet. But she would stack those together, and then I'd have my little slots to put my cards in because I couldn't hold that many at a time. And so if that's something, go ahead and check that out.
That's really cool.
But the other thing is, over the weekend, I got a chance to play some games with higher player counts. And it's not something that I get a lot of opportunity to do. And it's not games, I'm not talking about games where a 2-hour game that comes out and they're like, now you can have a 6th player. And you're like, That's a disaster. This is going to turn into an 8-hour game. I'm talking about games that are designed to be quick at higher player counts. And it's really cool. And it doesn't happen a lot. And I encourage people, if you don't get to experience that a lot, there are a lot of interesting and fun games that go up into the 6 and 7 player count that can be really enjoyable.
You want to say more about it or specific titles, or no? You want to leave it at that?
No, it's just the idea of changing up your play group if you can, and not
absolutely,
and not necessarily a and this isn't a call to action or that you should do this, because I know some people are, everybody's got their own circumstances of whether they're able to get more people to the table, but it is awesome that the hobby provides opportunities to get larger groups together to play a game and have a joint experience. And I just wanted to highlight that as being
great.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm going to take that right into my last thing about what's being awesome. More on that. I didn't mean to jump in there.
Nope, that's it.
I had that experience. Sometimes it's as simple as adding one person can completely change the dynamic of the whole game group, right? Mm-hmm. We had a neighbor kiddo over, I don't know, 7, 8-year-old friend of my youngest, and we played a game of Super Mega Lucky Box, and the wonder and awe that the kid had on learning a new game and picked it up right away. And, my wife is just a master teacher, and it was fun. It brought a level of excitement when somebody's learning a game for the first time. And then the other piece, and this is virtual, but Doug, I have a confession to make. I've been playing some games on Board Game Arena with the Game Schooler podcast group, and I've been getting absolutely trounced because I'll get invited to a game, and I don't know the rules of it. So it's like, I'll just jump in. I'll learn this one on the fly. Ooh, sea salt and paper. This one looks like fun. It's a Bruno Catala. Yeah, I'll read the rules quick and jump in. Next thing I know, I'm getting lapped. I had a really good second round, but then the third and fourth round, I don't know if people were hate drafting because, like I said, I didn't know the rules when I headed in and played it blind, but it was fun. I didn't even log my play because I don't know if I can log my play, but I had fun, and I saw a game, maybe two-dimensionally, but being able to hover over, I didn't have any of the color barriers, and I've had that happen about a half dozen times over the last 3 weeks where I've just jumped in.
Destroyed?
Absolutely destroyed. But I'm seeing a game and I'm kind of learning a game. And I don't know how much of that I'll do going forward in the next few weeks. We've got a convention coming up and some other things, a regional convention here. But that was fun. It was cool to, a call goes out on our Discord of looking for one more, looking for two more, and signal. People can just jump in and play. And a game of Arnak might end up taking 2 months, but then a game of sea salt and paper could be over in 15 or 20 minutes and you get trounced. So people are good at games. And I'll tell you, some of the listeners of the Game Schooler podcast are really good at games. So just thought I'd share that.
All right. Well, this week we're going to spotlight a game called Kinfire Delve. The Vainglory's Grotto is the version that we tried out, published in 2023 by Incredible Dream Studios. Michael, what else do you want to say about it?
Yeah, Kinfire Delve is designed by Kevin Wilson, and as Doug said, Incredible Dream Studios was incredible enough to send us along a demo. I'll talk more about that at the end, but I think I'm just going to jump right in and just talk about it a little bit, and is that okay?
Yeah, 1 to 2 players and about 40 to 60 minutes.
Yep, 1 to 2 players, 40 to 60 minutes. At one player, after you get it down, you're going to be able to get it probably in 20 to 30 minutes. So there's 2 lead characters that come in this smaller box game, all right? And they refer to their lead characters as seekers. And each seeker has a sidekick, which is called a lantern. And the art... Doug, just jump in here. I thought the art was beautiful. It was pretty awesome, shiny, and clean on the cards. What'd you think of the art?
It's unique. It's not necessarily my style, but that's not.
Okay.
I'm not going to say that it's terrible art. It's just not. It's just not a style that leaps out to me.
I really liked it. I don't know if it was just with the dark colors, with the shine, with the gloss, but I did the art pulled me in almost immediately from unboxing it. And it is a card game that has a few dice. And the cards that you're playing in your hand, boy, oh boy, are they valuable. So here's what's happening in the game. You've got this stack of cards here, and you are trying to get through them. And so on your turn, there's going to be one of 4 challenges. And you're going to play a card out of your hand, and the red cards are for power, the green cards are for finesse, and the blue cards are for wisdom, and then there are white cards that are kind of a wild. And you're basically going to take on a challenge. And I'm going to talk about this almost from a one-player standpoint, because I've played the game more solo than I have co-op. Now, Doug and I have played it co-op as well. So, Doug, please, as I'm talking, just jump right in, okay? Mm-hmm. But on your turn, you're going to say, I'm going to take on this challenge. And then the cool thing with it, you can actually take other cards from your hand to buff in that challenge. So if I'm going to play a challenge and I declare it with the red card, I could add an additional card for maybe a +1 or +2. And depending on what I need to beat it, right? Because sometimes you might need like a 12. And so in my cards, I might have 8 cards between the card that I played, a power of 8. And then you roll dice. And so between the cards that you play out of your hand, the buffs, and the dice, you either succeed or you fail on that challenge. And then there's different outcomes that happen with that based on the success or failure. So the game just comes with cards, comes with 4 dice, comes with a little D10 to keep track of your health. And that's kind of what you're doing. You're playing cards, and if you defeat it, you're going to draw down. You're going to delve down into the deck until you get to the end of the deck. Then the boss monster comes out, and you got to defeat the baddie and his 4 minions. Now, there's a couple of other things that happen. I talked about cards being valuable. And dear listener, I hope you're asking, well, what happens if I run out of cards? In a one-player game, I think you would draw back up to 8. So you're not drawing at the end of your turn. You're drawing when you run out. But when you do that, you have to take an exhaust. And the exhaust, they bring the pain. When you get an exhaust, some of them are basically like, oh, we're going to start an endgame tracker so that if you lose 4 more battles, you're done. Or from now on, this type of character is going to have an additional +2 to defeat. So something that was a 12 to defeat is now going to be a 14. And that's just kind of the basics of the Kinfire Delve, the Vainglory's Grotto that we played. There's 3 different villains in there. Doug, what would you want to add in or jump in about it?
Well, I mean, there's 3 different Kinfire Delve sets that you can mix together, which I think is pretty cool. Overall, I like the system. It's not necessarily a game I need to have in my collection. However, I think I'm more likely to play this than I would be Unmatched. So if somebody came up to me and said,
"Whoa,
I'd want to play Unmatched or this," I would probably lean towards this one. I think it probably works great as a solo game.
It does.
Although I'm not a solo gamer. And then my biggest kind of thought on it is I thought some of the card text was confusing at times for figuring out order of operations or when things are happening, when can I play this card, some of that type of thing, which I think if you're playing solo, you just kind of gloss over and it's like, yeah, I'm making my ruling and kind of going on.
You don't. How much of that could have been just the rules teach? You didn't think, because I know I kind of chopped it.
I felt like it was more on the wording of the cards than it was necessarily the rules teach, and unless you completely bungled the order of operations, but I don't think you did.
No, it's too straightforward. Even I couldn't mess that up. I mean,
so
on your turn,
just sometimes where it's like, okay, when exactly does this work or fire, or do I get this bonus? So there's just a little bit of confusion stuff on there, but not to the point that I'm like, oh, this makes it terrible. Or obviously, like I said, I'd play this over other games, and I thought it was a unique 2-player cooperative experience, especially coming off of Arnak.
Yeah.
This is quick, simple, and I could see people, couples or a couple of buddies just like, all right, let's run through one of these, and to be able to mix and match them is pretty cool.
So I loved it, and I loved it there were just a couple things that I just want to highlight while we're putting a spotlight on it, because I don't know how much more we'll talk about this game down the line, but I loved you have to try a challenge, right? So you've got to take on one of the 4 cards that are facing you, and you can, there's one on the north, south, east, and west, and you can kind of see, okay, which one of these challenges am I going to take on? And you may play cards out of your hand, but you must roll the dice. And so what I really enjoyed, the decision point was, how many cards do I want to put on that challenge, because the cards are so valuable in your hand. And so many other deck builders and kind of battlers, you're almost trying to churn through your deck, right? Get them out of my hand, battle, get more, get more, get more. And this takes that economy and flips it to the point where there were some times where, I was really hoping for certain dice rolls, but then I don't care if I fail that challenge, because I can take 1 damage here because I can mitigate that with a card in my hand. So I really liked how the card play and lack of card play played out. I loved this solo and enjoyed it cooperatively. I thought that this is about $20, and for $20, what's in the box, this is going to sit right next to my 2-player games that I keep on my shelf here. So Jaipur, Splendor Duel, Power Failure, Truffle Shuffle, I know isn't just a 2-player game, but for me in my house it is, and Chicken. I've got this little set where, Kinfire Delve's just going to plunk right in there. So I'm keeping it. And then the last part that I wanted to say is, they knew what they were doing. They sent it to the right guy. You send me a $20 review, and now I'm thinking I got to go all in and spend $300 in the pledge manager. Like it would. I'm interested to see more of this system. This is one that I'll seek out either at a convention, or if I see that people are playing it. I don't know when I'll come across it, but you know how the hobby is. Could be 2 years down the road, could be 3 years down the road, and somebody's got the bigger box version, the Kinfire Council, or version going, is like, ooh, I want to hop in and play that. So I'm interested in learning more about it and seeing I liked the different characters, trying to get the lantern to fire off. This was a good one for me. Like if I had to rate it on a scale, it rated about an 8 out of 10 for me. It was pretty darn fun.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's kind of confusing about it, is that there's Kinfire Delve, which is what we're talking about. There's Kinfire Council, which is a completely different game, and Kinfire Chronicles, which is a completely different game.
So Kinfire Chronicles is the big game. That's where you have a team of seekers work together to fight back the darkness threatening the world, right? That's the cooperative campaign game for 1 to 4 players. That's what came out in 2023. Then you have the 3 standalone games for 1 to 2 players,
which are the Delve games.
The Delve games. And that's the one that we're putting a spotlight on today. Yep. And then releasing in 2025 is going to be Kinfire's Council,
which is a competitive game of strategy and politics for 2 to 6 players. So very different, but in the same universe. Yeah.
Do you think we captured that well enough, or do you think we need to do some editing, try again? But I can reach out to the publisher as well and just follow up with our listeners.
Yeah, we'll follow up next week just to kind of button that up to make sure we got everything right. However, we can speak on Kinfire Delve, regardless of whether that morphs into any of the other Kinfire games. Kinfire Delve is what we talked about, specifically the Vainglory's Grotto version that we tried, and very interesting. A lot of interesting choices in there, and that I think one of the things that I really took away from it was the idea of going after a challenge, and then do I want to use a different card as a boost, even though I may need that card to attempt a different challenge later, and then maneuvering that with some of the special abilities on there. But a great game to try out, and one we wanted to highlight. So that is Kinfire Delve, Vainglory's Grotto. Before I move on to the game of the week, I want to remind everybody to sign up for gameschooler.com/Discord if you haven't already. A great community there. Really going crazy about the Amazon Prime deals going on which will be passed after when this episode releases. But if you want to get a good jump on deal hunters, this is a great group for that. Spread the word about the podcast. If you are enjoying what we're doing and you think other people that you game with might enjoy what we're talking about as well, let them know. And if you have any questions or comments, reach out to us, email@gameschooler.com. Now let's move on to the game of the week.
The game of the week. The game of the week is an in-depth look at a family-friendly game we think you should try if you get the chance. This week's game is Spotlight by Horrible Guild. Doug, give us the stats.
All right, released this year, 2024. The designer is Halmer Hawk and Lorenzo Silva. The art is by Julia Gahini. 1 to 5 players, about 15 minutes. This is going to be 6+ across the board. Board Game Geek, publisher, and the Game Schooler podcast are pretty much going to agree on that one. And this is going to be a children's game, although I would make the argument that normally when we talk about a kid's game or a children's game, that there would be a ceiling on it. This one I think is going to work higher than most children's game and really on the verge of being a family game. I could see my parents and my kids playing this one just fine together. Spotlight is a cooperative hidden object game in which you and your friends search with your trusty flashlight for wacky characters and items hidden in dark places, brimming with absurd things. Your goal is to find as many as possible to advance your pawns on the track and cross the finish line, without any players being reached by the moon pawn that is chasing you. The game is played over 5 rounds. Each player has a different board composed of a transparent layer on top depicting different part of the game scene and a black cardboard background that makes everything dark and difficult to see. At the beginning of each round, the hidden picture to search is determined by looking at the card on the top of the deck. When everybody is ready, players start looking for hidden pictures on their board with their magic flashlight, which can illuminate the board thanks to its white spot. When the sand timer runs out, players must stop searching, put down their flashlights, and set their dial on the number of hidden pictures they think that they have found. Then they reveal the backside of the hidden picture card, which shows them how many it was actually possible to find. And the more you found, the more your pawn advances on the track. But beware, the moon pawn will advance too. If the moon overtakes any player's pawn, you can spend a rush token to get them back in front of the moon. But if you lack rush tokens, the game is now over and you all lose. If all players cross the finish line without being caught by the moon, you all win. So for those of you that are watching on YouTube, I will do a quick little visual demonstration here. Put this up here. So as you can see, there is a transparency, and on that transparency is essentially what kind of looks like a gigantic Where's Waldo sheet, or those look and finds that we grew up on, very much like micro macro. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But behind it's black. So as it sits right now, you stare at it, you can't see anything. But then you take your flashlight here, magic flashlight, which is black with a white highlight at the end, which is the beam of your flashlight. And when you slide this under the transparency, it illuminates the part that you're looking at. So you can look around here.
The title of the game, Spotlight.
So that's kind of the clever mechanism of the game. What do you like about this one, Michael?
Oh, my goodness. The real-time nature of having to search for an item and sometimes be very certain about how many times you see it, and other times I have to act like I'm very certain, but it is a complete guesstimate.
Yeah,
I really enjoy all of that and how that comes out in this game. You know, you mentioned a game, Micro Macro. The other game that I would put this right in between or leading to would be a 5-minute mystery. just how you can play in a cooperative mode or a competitive mode, and both modes are fun. There's so much to like about this game, and the clever mechanism brings joy to young people and old people. This is a game that I think covers so many ages. I'm really glad you highlighted about the ceiling being a little bit higher than where we would typically place a kid's game, right?
Yeah.
How about you? What are some of your big likes?
Well, I think one of the interesting things, I mean, my main like is that with such simple technology or a simple concept that makes the game work. I love that the designers chose to make this a cooperative game, because the concept could have gone in so many directions. And you had mentioned that the rules do offer a competitive mode as well as the cooperative. But there's a lot of ways that they could have taken this game that I think maybe would have made it not as enjoyable for me. But the cooperative nature of it really makes it a very welcoming game that's challenging for both kids and adults at various times. And that's, sometimes you play a dexterity or a memory game, and it's one of those things where a dexterity game, the adults, unless the pieces are really tiny, probably have a little bit of advantage with better motor skills. But if you're playing a memory game, the younger kids seem to have a
crushed.
Better, and so this one seems to have a little bit of both of that. I love that when you're making your guess of how many you saw, you're either making a guess or I saw 5. The tricky part about that is the higher you go up on the dial, the more stars you're going to get. The more stars you get, the farther you move on the track.
Yep.
And so maybe I only saw 4, but I was really kind of rushing. Maybe it's 5, because if I go up to 5, that's going up to a 3 movement instead of 2. But if there was only 4 and you go over, you bust, you don't move at all. So you can always, if you just put 1, you're always going to move 1 space, but that moon is catching up to you. The other thing I really like about it is that you roll this dice to see how many spaces the moon moves. Well, there's a spot on here with a low battery. And when you do that, if you get that, the next round you have to play it. There's a flip side to this flashlight, which here's the circle is big, takes up the whole thing. Battery goes down, you don't get to see as much. So you got a smaller window to try and find when you're trying to do this little grid pattern. So I love the basic mechanisms, what they did with it. I think it's cool that every board has the same quantity of those hidden pictures, and that the people and items that you're looking for are not always in the same position. You may be looking for a guy in a yellow raincoat, and he might be dancing on a roof in one part of the picture, and he may be crouching over changing a tire in a different part.
Right.
So it's not just like, just scan for that one thing. It's not a
standard wizard pose. Yeah.
You have to deal with it. And there's something magical about before you flip over the card, everybody reveals their dial. And, sometimes you're like, I think it was 3. And then the kid next to you is like, there was
7.
12. I saw 12. And you're like, what? How is that even possible? And then you flip over the card and it's like 13. And there is a little bit of a chuckle and like, how is that possible? So I think it's a kid-friendly version of Micro Macro Crime City. If you don't want to introduce that type of subject matter, it has a lot of very similar components of that hunting throughout a map.
Yeah, and for listeners who are newer to our show, or maybe if you've just joined us in the last 100 episodes, Doug and I are fans of Horrible Guild. And not to speak for my co-host here, but in our collections, sitting behind me and sitting very close to Doug, are most of their games. I think they have maybe one title that's been out that we haven't tried yet, that's been out for a few years. So this fits in perfectly in their catalog of games, in the fact that for me, this is a game that hobby gamers, quote unquote expert gamers, gamer gamers, can play with anyone else in their family and be brought right down to their level for the reason that you just stated. Somebody says they saw 12 and you're thinking, I've got 3 on my dial, and then you have that reveal moment, and it was 13. And suddenly the person who plays 110 board games a year and every waking moment of their free time is thinking about games is completely humbled in a great way.
Yeah.
It has that wonderful mechanism, too, where something is coming after us. We're in this together. We've got to get out of this together. And it's completely family friendly. Family friendly. We were fortunate enough to get to play this with the designer at Gen Con. And I hope we didn't scare him with our enthusiasm, at least me. I'll speak for me too much. But again, this is just one of those games that's fun. It's exciting. It's engaging. And the other thing that I'll say, it plays fast.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just me, but this is really about a 15-minute game, right? 15, 20?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And so the stack of I love the variety in this game. So the stack of cards that are in this game is pretty much the size of a deck of cards. I don't know the exact amount on it. And there are some that are easier and some that are a little bit harder and things like that. But I love that even in the rule book, they say if you play this game so much that you start to remember how many there are, you can then go and have a quadrant variant. And so you pick out one quadrant of your board and how many are in there, because some of these, it's like there might be 2 in this section, there might be 4 in another section, and they're kind of divided out. And I love the ability to be cooperative, to be competitive. I think there are 4 or 5 different ways to scale the difficulty on this game to make it easier or harder depending on who you're playing. If you're playing with younger kids, maybe you don't use the sand timer. If you are playing with older kids, you're playing the quadrant variant, or you're playing competitively. To me, that's the amount of variety that a good family game should have, which is adaptable to the different age groups that I have in my house.
Yep.
To the point that this could stay in my house forever. And, I could have teenagers, and it's like, let's pull this game out.
Yeah.
And still have a rewarding
And the teenager
experience.
can play with the 7 and 8-year-old and be fine. You
Yes.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the skills that each of them are going to get, where maybe the teenager is really doing more of a speed reading, and that 7 or 8-year-old just has to be resilient because no, you didn't get the right answer, but we're going to keep going together.
Yeah.
I think this game really shines for reasons that I wasn't expecting. I had I don't want to say, I just had low expectations when I saw, oh yeah, it'll be a kid's game. I've got Simlos. I've got like 8 of the Simlos. I'll take a look at a kid's game by her. And then when I played that first round, I was sucked in. I could just see how this would work with family and a middle school after school game club, just all the different places where this would fit in between 2 very heavy games of, okay, we're going to take a break and we're just going to get Spotlight out. Where in the past, maybe I'd go to get a micro macro and put the big map out. No, I'll just get Spotlight out and we'll get away from the cow here a little bit.
Yeah, you mentioned some skills, and there's some really cool
Couldn't help
ones
myself, Doug.
in this game. The main one is obviously going to be observation, a game that rewards careful watching and details in order to understand or arrive at a judgment. But there are 2 hidden ones that we don't really talk about a ton, and this, I think, is if you've got fidgety kids or kids that you have kind of, keeping a wrangle on, the concentration in this game, in short bursts of when that timer's going, your kids are going to be head down and focused. They're going to be focusing their attention and efforts on a task to try and find however many of the item or people that they can. And I think that's really cool and one of the strong highlights of this game.
Is the concentration and the observation, those 2? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. And then I think the communication that happens in that moment of revealing how many did you see is pretty awesome. Yeah. And can lead to other not just stories, but you have some moments which then leads to a little bit of decision making of trying to scan in different ways. I know the first time I played, I went through as if I was reading a book and reading like a law book with state statutes very, very slowly. And that next thing I look over and the timer's gone and I've got about 65% of the map left.
Yeah.
So then it was up and down speed reading the next time. And I just think because of those rounds happen so quickly, you can find different ways to try to approach your challenge.
Yeah, another skill that we don't talk about a lot but comes up in this game, and it's a rule that we didn't talk about, which is the person in the lead can move back a space to help the person that's furthest behind come up a space, which is a great game of adding a skill of selflessness, a game that inspires players to put the needs of others in front of their own. There's a desire to be like, I'm doing the best, even though it's cooperative, but it is pretty cool that there's an opportunity for that kiddo in the lead to then say, no, I got to drop down to help bring you up so we can, we can stay alive and win this game. I think is really cool, and it's a clear, straightforward skill without kind of having to bend the rules or be tricky with how you're saying that. It's straight up in there, and I think it's a good. Not only is it good if the kids do it, but it's also awesome to the kids to see the parents do it if they're in the lead. It's like, oh, yeah, no, I got no problem dropping down a point to help, get somebody up here. So I think that's pretty cool as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I just have one more to add. It's not a game schooler skill, but it really is a game schooling opportunity. I think that Spotlight is a game that young kids, children, school-age kiddos can teach to each other. I think that this is a game that kids can teach to their grandparents. It is a very approachable and teachable game, similarly to Similo. I've had Similo in my house for a while, and my kids have taught it to others. And I think that Spotlight, and this is a pure hypothesis, Doug. I don't own the game yet, but I would imagine from playing it a handful of times and watching it taught by multiple people, this is one that I think that kids would be able to teach to other kids in a way that very few other games that we've covered could be taught.
Yeah. Are there any things that you think people should be aware of on this game?
It's actually the opposite. I'm talking to maybe if we have some folks who have healthy neck beards and really love to play, heavy, crunchy games with lots of dwarves and fantasy, and if you're still listening to this part of the segment, check this out. My only buyer beware is really approach it with an open mind. Yes, it's 15 minutes. You could have is it a game? Is it an activity? No, I think this could. I don't know if it will get the right push to be a classic game, but this is a nice little game here. It really, and I mean that with all the praise that I can give it. This was fun. Yeah,
and it's I guess the if you're playing it cooperative, you could make the argument, it's an activity, but the fact that it has the competitive mode in there makes it a full-blown game.
Which I don't know much about. The competitive mode, I only saw a demo.
You're just racing up the track, whoever's the highest, and then whoever is farthest up on the track for the next round, you play 5 rounds, whoever is the farthest up on the track has to use the small flashlight. So they're going, there's a little bit of a catch-up mechanism if you're in the lead. And then you play another round. Whoever's farthest ahead at the end of the 5 rounds is the winner. So fairly simple.
Awesome.
It's one that, I go through when I'm making my notes and I put on there things to be aware of and just, any little thing that kind of popped out that I think we should mention. And I couldn't think of anything.
Which says a lot because you've got a pretty good eye for.
And when I was doing it, I'll leave with this kind of closing thought, is that this is one of the best kids' family games that I've played in a while.
Yeah.
That just instantly jumped out and worked. I understood what it was. It had a catchy gimmick. Seeing it on the table makes everybody kind of go, ooh, how does this work? And the engagement and the fun, simple rules, you're up in no time, and the variety of gameplay options. It's been a while since I've played a kids family game that was this good. A lot of times when it comes down to kids games, I'll play it and maybe my kids really enjoy it, but I'm like, this has got a shelf life. We might be able to get a little bit more, but it's not going to keep them engaged for a really long time. This one, I'm like, this is going to be in the collection for a long time. So definitely one that I think you guys should check out if you get a chance. It's brand new, just came out. The price point's probably around $25 to $20.
Yeah.
Depending on where you get it. So that is our game of the week, Spotlight from Horrible Guild.
The School of Gaming. In the School of Gaming, we discuss concepts, keywords, etiquette, and helpful ideas in the world of gaming. This week, we discuss, why does a podcast broadcast to YouTube, Discord, X, Board Game Arena, and all other media platforms? So this is going to be more of a reflection, kind of where we've been, where are we going, where are we at today. And we have been fortunate to have some interviews lately, and some of our feedback has been, whoa, we're going to be on camera, huh? And so I want to get into some of that in this segment. Why does a podcast, why do we need to broadcast to YouTube? And what kind of, where have we been and where are we going? And I think that this segment could potentially help lead to a follow-up show or segment in which we get questions, because we've had some buzz on the Discord and through email just about, hey, have you guys thought about doing a big question and answer show? So I want to just start the segment there. I'll lead us into the segment, then I'll send it over to Doug. I think, certainly our first 50 episodes, even our first 100 episodes, we were a podcast.
Garbage.
No. But we recorded next to each other in Doug's basement. We did what we could to get the audio quality as high as we could. Doug put a ton of work. We had probably 4 or 5 different platforms along the way. We were changing mics in and out and really focusing on just being the best podcast that we could be. The challenge with that, though, listeners, and I think just to be very direct and honest, as we usually try to be and are, it's tough because there's no feedback. Like when we were just straight podcast, the only type of feedback we got were if a review popped into Apple or Spotify, or we got an email. And I don't want to say discouraging or disheartening, but it can be really challenging. And so our initial audience really was in that podcast sphere. And then with the launching of our Discord, and that was one of our listeners' idea, all of a sudden a community bubbled up. And that really then led to, okay, we're going to, and not only that, but I'll send it over to you in just a minute, Doug, so you don't just have to listen to a lecture here about our show.
I'm enjoying it.
But along the way, I noticed like my teenager listens to a lot of podcasts strictly on YouTube. Might subscribe, might not ever give a thumb up, but is listening to a lot of content on YouTube. And YouTube is a very crowded space, but it's a space where people go to. And Doug had brought up too about, hey, maybe we should get out into YouTube. And then that brought us to kind of the iteration where we are today. We record on a platform, which is awesome, but it allows me to stay in my house, allows Doug to send this out and broadcast it out to YouTube, allows people from around the world, such as Dr. Reiner Knizia, to jump in, or in our next segment, Dan Cunningham, to just jump in and be a part of the show, to where we are today. We really are the Game Schooler podcast, but I feel like we have a show with very defined segments, and in terms of where we're going, I want to do this for as long as I can. To me, this is a very life fulfilling. I build my week around it. My family knows that, in the afternoon on Wednesday, my employer knows in the afternoon on Wednesday, he's doing a show. And so, are we here to make $1 million? Not yet. But we're here to have fun and create a show together. And it's in that production of the show, and then what's happening over on Discord with the people that are doing great stuff over there, and a community that runs without us is awesome. So that's where I just wanted to kind of start and give you a moment to reflect and give you a moment to project about where we're going, because we're coming up on a milestone here, Doug.
Yeah. I think what, you had mentioned YouTube, and there's an opportunity that you can essentially take the same podcast feed that we have that's going to all the podcast platforms and just basically upload that to YouTube and have a static image that then is just audio, and there's the opportunity that it doesn't take that much effort, more effort for us to make this into a video show and let you see what we actually look like while we're recording, and play that out there. And I think you had touched on the idea of, you want to do this as long as you can. And Michael and I enjoy doing this because essentially it's just two buddies talking about games. If there were no listeners, we're still going to talk about games, whether it's
this would just take place very late on a Wednesday or Thursday evening.
And so I think the idea of branching off to YouTube is, and some of the other platforms, and trying to be active in a handful, not all of them, because we don't have the bandwidth to do all of them well, and we want to do a couple of them well, is to get our faces out there so people have a little bit more of a connection, to maybe potentially help it grow, but to grow not because we're looking for financial gain or that we want to make this into a business. Michael and I have busy lives. This is part of a hobby, and we enjoy it as a hobby, and we're not looking at, maybe I'll be able to quit my job. That's not the point. The point is the amount of people that we've heard, whether it was through Discord or emails, that have expressed to us the idea of having a positive place in the gaming universe. And Michael and I started the podcast in the frame of an educational lens, which we still do. But I think the big thing that we realized is that there was not a show catering to the positive parts of the hobby and the being okay with whatever level you are as a gamer, and some of those type of things that people have mentioned to us of, gosh, it's so nice that you're not chasing the hotness, and it's not always about the next thing and the next thing and the new thing. And I think Michael and I were looking for that personally, and maybe filled that void ourselves, that was out there. And so our point of wanting to grow it has more to do with introducing more people to the awesome community that's been built around this podcast, not necessarily anything financial or ego-wise. I don't know if that makes sense, but...
Oh, absolutely. And so why do we go to these different platforms? I think that was another, thing that I wanted to just address in this segment. And you said a lot there, Doug. There was a lot of really good stuff there. Our mission is to bring families together by teaching kids through engaging board games. And that is really, like, I feel like that part of the mission, and then being a safe place for new and experienced gamers. Those are things that I'm really proud about our show.
Yeah.
And so when you get out into different platforms, some of it can get very political. And anyone who listens to us knows, like, we don't really engage or touch politics, religion. Like, we don't address that on our show. And at the same time, like, I am very active on X right now, the platform formerly Twitter, for the Game Schooler podcast. And I'm doing that because that's where the publishers are. That's where other content creators are. That's where a lot of designers are. Not all of them. Some of them are on Instagram. Some of them are on TikTok. Some of them are on Blue Sky. I'm not on Instagram, TikTok, or Blue Sky because right now my focus is on X. That's where publishers are. That's where a lot of designers are. And we need to be able to interact with some of those publishers and designers in that way too, and really just let folks know about our show, so that, you know, we can potentially get a review copy, can potentially get people on our show for an interview, can potentially be able to experience a game at a demo or at a trade show and tell the story of the game. So that's part of it too, as the show starts to, or continues to evolve and will change, because whether we like it or not, Doug and I are all also committed to continuous improvement. And some of that is just how we were raised. And, if you guys could see the level of detail that Doug puts into our production and has really put a lot into the show. And I anytime that we can have to try to engage with listeners and gamers in the hobby, we love it. We just want to keep doing it. And I don't know.
I mean, I guess the big takeaway is, it's like, for me anyway, we can't do everything, and we get things of like, gosh, I wish you were on this platform or this, or do this. And it's like, we don't have the bandwidth to do all of that. And if we want to do something, we want to do it well. There's nothing more that and our Facebook is probably a good example of that, but there's nothing that I hate when there's like a 5-year gap, or like 3 months and then they post again. Like, at that point, just kill that platform off, which maybe we should with Facebook, because it's in there. But like, we want to do a couple of things, but we want to be able to do them as best as we can with the time that we have, in a way to reach and expand to more people.
And
go ahead.
And part of what Dr. Knizia said about staying relevant, that was one of his last messages to us, in that interview, was staying relevant. And it got me thinking about, we're going to rely on our listeners. And right now, a lot of that's in the Discord, that as platforms are changing, or if our show needs to look, I mean, we're listening. So if there is a place where you think our show fits in, or if there is a convention, a conference, a space that you think we should try to get to experience other things that are awesome with the hobby, we are listening. And that's why we do put our contact information out everywhere. And we're definitely so appreciative of everyone who's a part of the show. Because if you were to hop on our Discord, and I'm sure for anyone who's not on Discord or who's afraid of it, they're probably tired of hearing us talk about it, because it is so positive and people are so welcoming. I just think that that's a great example of, I don't know what is in store for us in the future, but that has been for me, the best positive change over the last 100 episodes, is our Discord. And if you would have told me at episode 100, hey, you guys are going to go to Gen Con twice, your show's going to get broadcast to YouTube, you're going to get to interview Reiner Knizia and Phil Walker Harding and Mike DeLisio and Daniel Reynolds, and have publishers on, and you'll have a little bit of a bump on YouTube as well, be like, come on. That's not all going to happen in the next 2 years. So I don't know what's going to happen in the next 100 episodes, but I just wanted to take a moment here in episode, 191, and just kind of reflect on where we're at as a show. And then it really, I'm interested to hear about where people think we'll be heading as well, because we really do rely a lot on the feedback that we get.
Yeah, awesome. So let's, we talk about games that we play. Let's talk about how we put them away with our high five on inserts. If If you're anything like us, you're constantly on the hunt for new games to try out. This week, we have a very special guest, Mr. Dan Cunningham, and we're going to be talking about our high five favorite inserts, which Dan Cunningham, a good guy to have on the show because he is a world-renowned designer of inserts.
Not sure about world-renowned, but you've probably seen my work.
We're sure about that. You're one of the we consider you to be one of the 3 titans in the industry. We'll get into that.
We'll get into that.
Yes.
Okay. So this was a hard. I was talking to Michael. This is a hard list for me to make because there are so many different types and what I guess kind of services the game, and trying to avoid like super deluxe Kickstarters of like.
Well, I didn't avoid super deluxe Kickstarters, but it's hard to just not use all 5 super deluxe Kickstarters.
Yeah. Michael's are all $500 games.
Not all. And we just jumped into it, but let's just reintroduce Dan briefly. If you want to know more about Daniel Cunningham, go back to episode 111, where we did a full interview of Dan, and he taught us a lot about physics and about games that I'm still not smart enough to play. But anything else that we need to do to lead you into the episode here, Dan, other than you're recently on Ludology. So a big-time award-winning podcast. You were on there, episode 329, I believe, just a few episodes back. So we really appreciate you being here.
No, it's my pleasure. Yeah, and as part of that, I actually went back through all of the games that I've worked on just to count. And the final count at this point is I've worked on 43 games, but now I've forgotten it. More than 20 of them are still yet to be actually produced. So they're either so I've had a ramp up of work. So it's a lot more than I expected.
You're on the Reiner Knizia plan.
I like to hear.
I like to hear. So Dan, what goes into, before we start with the list, what goes into, in your mind, what makes a great insert, and what are you thinking about when you design one?
Right. So a great insert does more than just hold the components. I mean, so at the beginning of the industry, inserts were there basically as a shipping buffer. It was there so that the components wouldn't break on the way to the consumer, and then people would either keep those inserts or toss them. Within the last decade, the status of inserts have gone up because they are trying to do so much more. And so whenever I'm going to approach designing a storage solution, at the best case scenario, we're making it easier for the consumer to set up, but we're also trying to make it look nice. So there's certain types of trays that not just are functional, but are also aesthetically nice. And in the high five, we'll get to a few of those that I think are aesthetically really improve the game. But when I approach a game and solving that storage solution, it's not just holding the components, it's also making it easier in some way, usually easier to get it to the table.
Yeah, that's a big qualifier for me and I think almost every one of mine has that, which is how can I get this set up and taken down faster? Yeah. And with the limited use of baggies and other, makeshift things that people have come up with. A classic is here's all the components and here's 10 baggies, put them in there is right. Like the bare minimum on insert. Probably be easier to make a list of the high five worst inserts.
Yep.
The instant throwaway inserts, but we want to highlight the best of the hobby.
Right. Yeah, let's celebrate what's awesome with inserts today.
Exactly.
All right. So we'll go Michael, Doug, and we'll give Dan the closer.
Oh, okay. I'll get stepped on the most. So
no, because you're the expert.
You're the expert.
All right.
Yeah, you're the prestigious
plebes in the insert game. So what do you got at number 5, Michael?
Well, number 5, this one's going to get laughing and having Doug's just head shaking right away, and it's from 2012, all the way back then. It is the standard Aaliyah tray in Las Vegas. So my backstory with this, when I opened up Las Vegas and I said, ooh, I really like the insert in this. It holds the dice, it holds the cards. And Doug shook his head and he goes, Michael, that's the standard Aaliyah tray.
Yeah.
But for me,
get that with Puerto Rico and a whole bunch of other games too.
It does really work well. It holds the dice, it holds the little casino spots, and it allows us to just get the game in and out. So it might be a standard Aaliyah tray, but Rudiger Dorn and team, Las Vegas 2012. That's my number 5. And I haven't had them on a high five in like 4 or 5 episodes, so I had to find a way to sneak it in there.
In there.
Yeah.
Yep.
I was just looking up. I feel like there's 5 players in Las Vegas, but there's like only 4 components.
4 trays.
Okay, just clarifying there.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'm going to go in a different direction. My number 5 is Flamecraft, published in 2022 by Manny Vega, Cardboard Alchemy, and Noah Edelman and Bryce Cook are the designers of that insert. Common theme throughout my entire list will be this is another one that setup and takedown are easy. Another thing that I love about this insert is the fact that it has 2 trays that you pull out that have all of the bits and components, so you can basically pull them out and set them on either side of the table, and everyone has access to all the resources that you're getting throughout the game, which I think is a huge boon in any sort of insert, that I can just set that up. I don't have to dump them into extra trays. I don't have to take them all out of baggies and try and put them back into baggies. And so I think they did a great job on Flamecraft, which is my number 5.
And Doug, if people wanted to learn more about Flamecraft, where could they go on our show? Take a guess. What episode number was it?
106.
Oh, you're so close.
Ooh.
105. Go back to
wow,
105 and listen to Flamecraft as Game of the Week, and we gush about that game and talk all about it there.
Yeah, I definitely love those removable trays, because those are an easy way to kind of just get components to the table fast. You don't even have to take them out of it.
Yeah.
My
right, Dan,
number
what's your number 5?
My number 5 is from 2022, and I'm hoping I'm not stepping on any toes, but I really like the tray set from Foundations of Rome. That's from 2022, Arcane Wonders, Emerson Matsuuchi. It is a very big box, but the deluxe components really required a nice tray set that you could speed it to the table. If you had to sort all of those buildings as you got them out, that would be really irritating. So one thing I love about that is each player gets their own tray. They're color coordinated. And then the other aspect that's a little more nerdy and technical from a tray designer standpoint is they're the first that I've seen that does 2 things. One, a box that's sideways. So the trays either lay this way, or when you're taking them out, you turn the tray toward, or the box towards you, and you slide them out. And they had a tray that was stored on its side. That's very, very rare. I've really never seen that anywhere else. But the player trays are all stacked, and then one more tray is actually stored vertically on its side compared to those. So I really liked that set of trays. I don't own the game, but I really like the trays.
Yeah, that's my number 4. So I'll jump in on that as well. Foundations of Rome 2022. It is uncredited as the tray designer if you look up the full credits. So maybe we could do some research and find out who did that design. I agree. I typically play with yellow, and I love opening up that box and then just sliding out the yellow player piece. It also fits a lot of the expansion components and things like that came later on. Very, very easy to get things to the table with the insert from Foundations of Rome. And if you're going to spend, I don't know, $391 or $291 on a game, whatever it is, people argue about the price, but I know what I paid for it. You want to be able to get played, right? And so without that insert, I think my plays would probably be cut in half. I know more than once I've been able to just take it upstairs to the kitchen table, put all 20 pounds on the table, lift up the lid of the box, and then from there, it's just real easy. Everyone grab a tray, let's get it going. So that's my number 4 as well as Foundations of Rome.
Man, I feel remiss that I didn't put that on the list. It's not in my collection, so it's just kind of out of sight, out of mind. But that is an excellent choice there for everything that it does, because that, you're right, Dan, would be a pain in the butt to just kind of organize and set up.
Does Foundations of Metropolis, before we move on, does Foundations of Metropolis, which doesn't have do those have trays? I actually didn't look that one up.
I feel like it has a similar, not necessarily the trays, but it does have everything to keep in order in the box. From what I gather, like that is fairly well done conversion compared to what they're working with. So
good.
But I don't have a full grasp on that. My number 4 is another one that I think does a good job, and you're going to hear a lot of the same insert designer for some of mine because I think that they do a really good job. But that's Distilled, which came out in 2023. Paverson Games, the designers Dave Beck, and this is another Noah Edelman and Bryce Cook insert design. But what I think Distilled does really well is not only does it have the removable trays for the resource components that you're using throughout the game, but the tray is organized in a way that Distilled has a lot of variable setup of the different spirits and things that you can use in the game. And it makes it really easy to grab the components for the spirits that you're using based on the way that the insert is set up. So it makes it easier to just say, all right, we're using this, pull it out of the tray and put it on the table. And then I guess one of the things that I really enjoy about a good insert is when I don't have to keep going back into the box to find stuff.
Yeah.
And this does a good job of organizing it so you can set it up and it's on the table, and then it's like box it out of the way, put it on a different table, move it out because you don't need it anymore. But it wasn't hard to get all of those components that you need for a variable setup. So that is my number 4, Distilled.
Can I hop in there and ask Dan a very direct question? I'm going to digress here a little bit, but hey, it's our show. Dan, how do you accommodate for deluxe components and standard components? So if a game has like just cardboard components, but you know that they have added on a ton of super chunky, heavy deluxe components, how do you accommodate for that when you're building out an insert?
That's a
And
great
I think
question.
Distilled made me think of that, right?
Sure.
Because, yeah.
There's essentially 2 ways you can, well, 3 ways you can do it. You can either ignore the deluxe components because, maybe the people that buy the deluxe components want to throw away their trays anyway. I hope not.
Much to the chagrin of all Kickstarter backers.
Yes. You also could try and accommodate just the deluxe, so they have to store the cardboard components elsewhere. So that way that tray
Outside
can
the
be
box.
used both by the people without the deluxe and with the deluxe. Or you try and integrate so it holds all of it. Generally, that comes down to what the publisher wants. Most of the time, that the stuff that I've worked on, the publisher goes with that second option where they say, I want something that will hold the deluxe, but won't be massive if you don't have both the deluxe and the regular in there. That way, you're saving space. Because if you try and accommodate both regular components and deluxe components, you pay a cost, and usually that cost is in box size. That box size has to be bigger. Or it's ergonomics. You're trying to pack more stuff into a smaller space. So generally, the best option is to go with just the deluxe sizing, and you just have to store the rest of the components elsewhere.
Yeah, it drives me nuts when they actually have an insert that has both spots for the deluxe and the non-deluxe, because you can keep them both in the box, but when it comes time to set up, you're like, is there a deluxe version of this component or not? And you're trying to kind of figure like, oh, wait, no, these are just the wood versions of that. We don't need those ones. And I like to be able to have the space. If I don't have the deluxe, it can all go in there. And if I do have the deluxe, it's like I'm taking the non-deluxe out and putting it in a completely different bin because I don't need it for my game.
There was an interesting example.
All right, what's your number 4, Dan? Oh,
okay,
sorry.
I was just going to say, there's an interesting example of a one I did that is not quite in production yet. Paradox Initiative from Elf Creek Games. They have that same situation where they come with some with cardboard components, and then some are replaced with acrylic components or better plastic components. And usually, when you are trying to accommodate just deluxe and then also fit the other, you just have a loose well. But this one, they wanted a stack of them laid sideways. And so what I ended up doing was creating essentially 2 portions. You use just the one if you have the regular punch board, but then if you have the deluxe pieces, you use both. And you take the punch board out, but they're about equal size. So the cardboard ones can go in, they sit nice and held securely, but then you can take those out and put the deluxe ones into both sections. So that's kind of a cool solution for that.
It's a whole other level of gaming we're not thinking about right now.
That's a paradox. That's a paradox.
Yeah. My number 4 actually is another game trays from Noah Alderman and Bryce Cook. This one is Parks from 2019, Keymaster Games. Parks was one of the first that I saw that really took a token tray and made it an aesthetic object. If you've seen the token trays for parks, they look like tree branches, and the sections within them are divided up. And it actually comes with two, so you can take them, put them on opposite sides of the board, and have the players on opposite sides of the table use them. And to me, it exemplified that beauty that you can do with trays. More recently, Harvest from Keymaster also did that same thing, where their tray stacks, their tray token trays look like barns. Really liked that too. Usually those aesthetic touches, again, I mentioned comes at a cost. Usually it means the box is going to be a little bit bigger because you're not packing everything as tight as you could. But I would say Parks was a really good example where it was a good optimization of the space and being aesthetically nice.
Yeah, great choice there. There's another one that's on my honorable mentions, but I'll hold off on that. That does something very similar in case somebody mentions it later.
Okay.
Awesome. That's great. My number 3 is from 2023. It is from Thunderworks Games. It is Dawn of Ulos, and the insert designer is joining us here on the show. So I'm going to talk about what you created as if you're not here, Dan, and just talk about what I love about the Dawn of Ulos. So Dawn of Ulos is I love the game. It's a fascinating game where you are essentially playing a god in the universe of Ulos, and you are controlling and manipulating multiple armies. It's a stock market game, though, really. You're trying to buy low and sell high and bet on the value of armies. But what's cool about it, the boards are very uniquely shaped that you're playing on. And you also have these nice little hexagonal tiles where there's 2 tile pieces that fit together. If anyone's played Honey Buzz, it's kind of similar where you have these pieces that you're setting down on the terrain type. And what's really cool about the insert, what I had never seen before, is there's this plastic tab that you push down. You go bloop, bloop. And when you push down on it, you're able to then pull the entire insert tray up, and everything just fits beautifully in there, including the deluxe metal coins, if you choose to get them from Keith Mateka at Thunderworks. But to me, what I love about the insert of Dawn of Ulos is it's things that we've talked about. Not only does it help to get things to the table, but for cleanup, it's phenomenal. Because without that insert, I would just have to throw everything into the box. And so I'm able to just kind of get everything back into its little compartments. And then when the plastic piece fits on top at the end, I get that same feeling of satisfaction that you get kind of when you open up a game box, where you're like, you get that whoosh. I get that when I put the plastic tab back on top. So that's my number 3 is Dawn of Ulos. The insert designer is one of the 3 titans in the industry, Dan Cunningham. Dan, anything to add in your own design?
I can say that that was an interesting challenge because Thunderworks has a standard box size, a box footprint. It started with Role Player. They've tried to keep as much as possible to that size, though he's flexible in the height of the box. So that was a design that came in that we couldn't modify the footprint. And so that tray was special in essentially the way you mentioned. It used a different lid. It's not the snap over the side lid. It's kind of got a different arrangement. And that was because we needed to fit everything in that footprint. In my honorable mentions, I'll talk about a little bit about where that inspiration I feel like came from for that type of lid, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah, but I love the lid is almost concave, dear listener, and the way that you get the concave lid off is you just press on a corner, and then the plastic lid indents down and it just pulls right up. It's brilliant.
I'm interested to hear what that honorable mention is because I feel like that has come up in a game night where Dan may have looked at that game and been like, "Oh, that's neat," and then you see him over in the corner fidgeting with it for a little while.
I think that might be it.
Put that
on first at your house.
All right, well that'd be interesting. Probably not even on my list. My number 3 is one that I think does a really good job of combining a lot of components into a box in a way that's organized, and that's Scarface 1920. This came out in 2023, not 1923. It's an heirloom game.
That'd be impressive. If that game came out in 1923, that would be an impressive design.
The trays are all solid metal, made of lead. It was from Red Set Games and Noah Edelman again, but what Scarface 1920 does that I will mention on my next 2 games as well is it has individual player trays that you can pretty much say, oh, you're being this faction, here's your tray, It has everything you need, all your starting materials set up to go. And the amount of cut down on setup and takedown that you can, at the end of the game, everybody takes all their pieces back, puts them back into their tray, and hands them to you, and it all goes back in the box. And it does a great job with the amount of components that are in this game. It has the 2 trays that you can decide. It's almost a culmination of a lot of the stuff that I've talked about, which is the resource trays for both sides of the table. Everybody has their own player tray for easy setup, and the other components are varied in a nice way that you just plop them on the table, you're ready to go. So for a game that's got a weight of almost a 4 and a pretty complex game, you don't often associate that with an easy setup. A lot of those games are like, all right, well, the game is 2.5 hours, but it's going to take me an hour to get everything seated and ready to go. This game doesn't have that problem, and that's why it's number 3, Scarface 1920.
Awesome.
My number 3 is not as deluxe as most, and it actually has a tray that is a 1 part plastic tray and 1 part something else, and that is the game Dice Forge from 2017 from Libelid. And what I really liked about that, this one had an uncredited insert designer. The thing I really liked about Dice Forge is it utilizes that 1 tray to hold all of the components that you're going to use for setup, and then it's got a double layered board that comes in a sleeve that comes out, and it has all of the dice faces. In that game, you are assembling a die. You're replacing faces on a die as you roll them. And so having all of those dice faces organized on a separate tray doesn't happen to be plastic. It's paper in this case. But that really speeds up that setup and tear down. And the other really nice thing about it is when you take the board out and set it in front of the lower part of the box and leave the tray for all the dice faces on top, it forms a continuous play surface. The artistic design is there so that the board extends to the side of the box, extends up to the top of that dice tray. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, and it fits in a sleeve and then has a band around it.
Yeah.
So those components are jostling around when you're transferring it or moving the box around, which is really cool as well. Great choice there. I feel like I'm getting outshined on the games. I just feel like I told Michael this is one of the hardest lists I've ever made.
Yeah,
and I feel like there are so many awesome examples, and I love the different direction that you're bringing in, Dan, because you have the experience. So there are odd little things that you pick out, and
I've seen a lot.
Just kind of ignore them. Of like,
yeah, you're living it, Dan. We do appreciate it. My number 2 is from what I would consider another one of the titans in the industry, and this is where, dear listener, Dan's also a game designer. Dan's done some development work. Like when you get into the industry, a lot of people and what they're credited for in the design, it really shifts. And this next insert designer is in a similar realm, and that's Randall Lloyd designed the insert for Invention's Evolution of Ideas by Vital Lacerda. And so I did bring one, super deluxe heavy game. I have some props here.
Yeah.
And it's a gigantic box. Like I have to lay it down as if I'm putting it to bed in the calyx. But what I love about it, and what I think, when you look at kind of the evolution of the inserts of some of those, even the Eagle Griffin games, is it's got that plastic sheet that fits in it, and then the rule book and everything, and the actual player board fits on top of that plastic sheet, so everything is flat. You know what I mean? So at the end of the day, when I put it away, it's really nice and flat and cozy, to the point where if I want to, open the box up, I can get into something, get in and out of there quickly. I just really appreciate, Doug mentioned the Scarface 1920 game. I appreciate when a heavier game, an expert level game, a hobby level game allows me to just be able to get into the box, out of the box, look at something, grab something quickly, and not feel like it's going to be a chore to even open the game box. And I know if I listened to the words that I'm saying like 5 or 6 years ago, I would say, what is your problem? But that's kind of a real thing for me. Sometimes it's like, I don't want to open that box over there because I know if I do, the rule book's going to pop out and all the stuff underneath it's going to go everywhere. And so I think that Randall Lloyd, who designed the insert for that, just did a really nice job of making sure everything is tidy and accessible in Inventions, Evolution of Ideas, a game that was just released in 2024 by Eagle Griffin Games and designed by Vital Lacerda, and then, of course, the beautiful work of Ian O'Toole as well.
Eagle Griffin, I feel like, has come a long way. I was just going to say, like, On Mars was on my short list because that was another that I think had a good one. I've never actually seen it in person, but I've seen pictures. So it didn't make my list. But yeah, Eagle Griffins, they're very functional and good, and there's thought that definitely goes into it.
And the Gallerist is another. I only have 2 of their games of Vital Lacerda's games, but I have the Gallerist, which is about 10 years old, and then Inventions. And if you just look at the leaps in that time, you can tell that having a functional, pragmatic, clean insert has become a thing in the hobby for a company like that. They put attention to it. So,
yeah, I think it'd be interesting because I think all of us could come up with a list of inserts where they're really nice, and then you like have to play a game of Jenga or spatial puzzle to try and fit. Like, technically, there's enough space for the things in there. You mentioned about like trying to close a game and it not quite fitting or exploding all over the place. And it's like there are some inserts that I have where it's like, I don't know what type of engineering you did to try and fit these pieces back in here, but it's not intuitive, and I need a special degree to organize it. And if I don't, it's like I don't need a second puzzle after I get done playing the game.
Yeah.
And my next one is not like that, but it does go to show that there are a lot of the games on this list are games that I really enjoy, and they're games that we talk about quite a bit. And I think one of the reasons that is, and I'm sure our listeners are like, I can't believe you're talking about this game again, but because they tend to combine all of the best things, right? They have great art, they have good inserts that makes them easy to get to the table, and good gameplay. And this one we've talked about a ton, but that's Dice Throne. And the battle chest boxes that you can say, all right, you want to be the gunslinger, here is your box, you're all set to go. I don't need to give you any other components. There's no other components. You know, there's not a second tray that's like, here's all of the extra stuff.
But I don't want to be the gunslinger. I want to be the shadow thief. They go to the box and get the shadow thief.
Exactly. And so a lot of times they'll be, okay, there's 5 or 6 different characters, but here's the stuff that every game needs, kind of like the core components. This one doesn't have it. It's literally, here's your box, and you have everything. Here's my box, I have everything, and we're ready to go. And I really think that helps this game get to the table faster and makes it easier to, you know, sometimes you're looking at a box on a shelf and you're thinking, all right, what's the setup going to be? How do I, you know, it goes into a thing of like, how am I going to pull that off the shelf? And sometimes I look at games and I'm like, I need more time. I need to like actually get into a mindset to pull that game off the shelf. And this is an insert that makes it easier to just get up in gaming. So that's my number 2, Dice Throne.
So my number 2 doesn't use a plastic tray, but it has a very good storage solution that I really appreciated. So this was from 2019, which now is 5 years old. It's a Wonderful World. And that game, especially the first deluxe Kickstarter that I got, had the perfect arrangement of deck boxes for all of the components. And to me, I really loved and appreciated how the box was fully utilized both for the expansion. It was left room for the expansion in the original Kickstarter, and all of the components. And yeah, the other nice thing is some of those boxes, you pull out a little bowl with all of the tokens in it. So there's a bowl in a box, but the boxes still meant that everything was perfectly arranged and nice, and they weren't difficult to put in individually. You just pull the boxes out and slide pieces out, and you were done. And so that was 5 years ago. I think it was the first that I was aware of that you really utilized the full footprint of the box with tuck boxes in a very smart way.
Awesome.
Is this one? So this is one that I thought I kind of was looking at my wall of games and going through of like which ones mentally just stood out to me, and that was one that I remember. I'm like, oh, this one's got a good insert, and then I opened up my box and my insert is gone because I've gotten an expansion. Is there an expansion that does not fit in there?
So the retail version of the game, I don't know if you got the big deluxe.
Okay.
That at the first Kickstarter,
I got
came
the
with
Kickstarter,
like
but I
two
didn't get the deluxe, I think.
Okay.
I didn't get
That's
any
probably-
expansions
yeah.
with my Kickstarter.
Yes. So the Kickstarter had a Kickstarter base, which was fine, and then it had a Kickstarter big, which came with 2 legacy expansions in it. That
Gotcha.
bigger box had a foam block for their anticipated expansion 2 years down the road, which then when they came out, it fit right into that box too.
Gotcha.
So it's one of the bigger boxes I own, but it was worth it.
I wish I had that box.
I've played that over 50 times, so it's great.
All right. On to number 1, Michael.
That's impressive that you've played it 50 times, Dan. That says something right there. That's awesome. Number 1 for me, Doug, it's already been more than 2 years. When I say this game, this was a game of the week back in episode 87, and that's Trekking Through History. And I do have the first edition, but what I really appreciate about the first edition is that the playmat fits in the top end of the box. And then this is Noah Edelman and Game Trays. They did a really nice job with the storage solution, and the cards, you can divide them up just as the cards sit in the game within the container. And then what we've talked about before, the tokens come right out of there ready to go. So bad moments in podcasting with me doing a half attempt at props here.
That's why we have video, Michael.
That's why we broadcast to YouTube. But everything from the inside of the box with the graphic design and the art of this game, and I feel like the tray just fits in perfectly with it. This is also a game that I think really ignited my solo gameplay. As I look back at my log plays, and if I look at, well, where did I really start to play games solo, because I just wanted to be able to play the game and try different strategies and really dive in. And I think that Trekking Through History with that September of 2022 time period is about that time. And I think the insert does have something to do with it, because at that time I was just playing on a kitchen table, and so I could get the game out, or actually throw it right down on the island in our kitchen. I could get the game out, put it out, play it in an hour, pack it up. So from 9 to 10 o'clock in the evening, I could get a game in. And that's just one insert that when we were putting the list together, I was like, I know it's going to be on my top 5. I just don't know where I'm going to slot it. So
yeah, no, great choice. And it has that, you mentioned the neoprene board that rolls up and fits in the box, and that was one of the things I forgot to mention on Flamecraft, which also has that rolls up and fits in the side, compared to the other games that I have that come with playmats that don't fit in the box, and you have off to the side, or like, oh yeah, I do have a playmat for that, or
you look like a cartographer from the 1700s. With just
let me get my bundle here.
Playmats are really tough from a trade standpoint, because they are very much a kind of a nice addition, but not everyone buys, and they take up a lot of space.
Yeah.
So if you allocate space for them, and if they are an optional accessory, like, then the people that buy it and don't have the playmat, they're like, what's all this extra space?
Well, and both of those are examples of games that they use that as the main board.
Yeah,
there is no other alternative. So
I think Herstory
just
did
one
it
note
too.
before we move on. Oh, yep.
Yep.
I said it, but I said it in passing. I have the first edition, so I know there is a newer edition of Trekking Through History out. I have no idea what that insert looks like, so I just wanted to put that little caveat out there as games change over time.
All right, my number 1 is, this could be one of the first times that I've ever done this, is a game that I don't necessarily care for, and it's not I might play it again, but I think that the insert was so well done that I needed to put it at the top of the list, and that was one that came out in 2022. It's designed by the person joining us on the podcast, and that is Endless Winter Paleo-Americans.
Oh, that insert's amazing.
This was from Stan Kordonsky and Fantasia Games. And Dan just did a really good job of having the individual player trays that we were talking about, that all the components are set up and ready to go, and a game that requires a whole bunch of kind of different modules and game areas that those components are organized in a way that make it easy to set up and get to the table, to the point that I don't even remember it being an issue. I remember when we played this, it was pretty much like, here's your stuff, all right, and into the teach and ready to go.
Yeah.
And so then aesthetically, that the inserts are all in white and clear. It's very clean. It blends into the theme, and just a phenomenal job. So well done, Dan. That's my number one, Endless Winter Paleo Americans. Where did you think we were crossing over, Dan?
I thought, okay, we'll get to that, but I actually, it was nice to be able to work on that Endless Winter. Fantasia Games, this was kind of their debut game. They wanted a big impact. They were willing to spend a little more money, and I said, let me make a cool tray. So not only were they white and clear, like you said, but I even had the aesthetics of making it look like the side of a glacier. We put some extra features in there that did nothing but just make it look like a glacier, like little things like that. And I do think that
bling,
really
bling.
helped. Yeah, it helped bling it out, and it was really cool, and it was fun to work with. That one, though, wins the competition for me for the most revisions of a 3D CAD, because I built the thing for their Kickstarter, and then post Kickstarter, they did a lot of new development, and so the component counts changed. The modules changed. They wanted to do an expansion. We left room for the expansion in the big box. Things were just evolving, so that it went through a dozen different restarts of the CAD. Not quite. I think it was maybe 9 or 10, but it was a lot.
Yeah.
And so it was a lot of time, but it really ended up nice. I'm happy about it. My number one.
All right. What's your
thought
number one,
the
Dan?
overlap was going to be, I would call it the granddaddy of the tray design as we are now, and that was from 2016, Mechs vs. Minions. So that one was Riot Games, and they
choice.
went over the top with all the production, including all of their trays. And from a nerdy tray design standpoint, miniatures are the hardest things to put into trays. They're just annoying to work with, because you want to balance functionality, how easy it is to put miniatures back in, versus the time it would take to design all of the little wells. So I think Riot Games did a really great job with their tray sets. Their pieces that come out. It's been a long time since I played this one, but as I'm looking at the trays again in photos, I'm like, oh man, I do remember this, and it really, all of them had lids. They all had aesthetic features. Like, to me, it was the granddaddy of what has become the world of innovative trays.
Yeah. Well, and for a game that, if it came out now, would probably be a $250 Kickstarter.
Yeah.
I think it was like $80 when they came out, which was just completely unheard of with the minis, the insert, and the deluxe components of that game. So great call out there. That was on my short list as well. One of the honorable mentions I wanted to highlight, which is, I debated putting this on the list, but is Folded Space, which is just an aftermarket, as far as there are a lot of games that either don't come with an insert, or they don't accommodate the expansion, or the original insert happens to be an Aaliyah standard one from Las Vegas.
Or there's no insert.
Yeah.
And it's just air.
And so what they've been able to do with some foam core, and to make inserts that are more universal and combine, they're not as slick as what Dan and maybe Game Trays are doing, but the versatility of them to be able to upgrade a game, I wanted to highlight them as well.
I'm really glad you did. I was thinking about it too, but prior to Folded Space, most of those aftermarket inserts were wooden, and you'd cut them out and you'd glue them together, and they would add so much weight to the game that when they started doing it out of the foam core, I'm like, that's how you do it. The shipping is easier, the assembly's easier, and then the box is just lighter in general. So liked that.
And cost, right? The cost changed dramatically too, where it went from, geez, do I want to get a $70 wooden insert for this $30 game? Or that type of thing changed. The other one that you had mentioned about, you had mentioned parks as having a design element, and Dog Park was on my short list, and those resource trays are a dog bone, which I think is really cool and adds to the thematic elements of the game. Role Player Adventures, which you did, Dan, is another great one with a good master class and fitting a lot of content in a single game.
Well, and organizing deck boxes and cards.
Yeah, so that one does really well. My Father's Work is another one that organizes a lot of content very well. And then right on the edge, which I couldn't put it because of some of the production issues on the first edition, but hopefully the second edition are better, is Planet Unknown with the Lazy Susan tray. I think that has the potential to be right there if they get that lid close and everything down there. How about you, Michael? Which ones just missed the cut for you?
So I have 5 that missed the cut that haven't been talked about yet. Return to Dark Tower, I think, has a really nice insert, especially when you can just put the lid right over the top and it's very clear where everything goes. The biggest complaint about that insert is you have enthusiastic gamers that want to fit all the expansions into the base box. I'm sorry, okay? But the base box is a fantastic insert. I have Honey Buzz Fall Flavors, which is designed by Daniel Cunningham, joining us here on the show. That's the deluxe edition, though. That's why I couldn't put it in the 5, because you have to have the deluxe to get the Danimal treatment on it. Really, really nice insert there that fits everything. And then Marvel United, I think, in terms of a $25 game where it tells you where the minis go back, and everything's really nice and organized and helps you to get it out to the table. And then just recently playing that at your house, Doug, so I might have some recency bias there. 2 more quick ones. I like the insert for Forbidden Island from GameRight. Now, it might fit in a tin, which could make some people cringe, but when I unsnap that tin, I'm able to get everything right out to the table and get everything right back where it goes. It's just a cheap little plastic thing, but it seems to work. And then my 5th one is Wonderland's War. And for me, I really only wanted to put one hobby game on my list, but Wonderland's War is also a gigantic box that has so much stuff in it, minis and components, and I'm the other reason why I couldn't put it on the list, there's incredible lift on it. You know what I mean? So it's got bags, but it's still a pretty nice insert nonetheless. One that I actually stepped on.
Yeah, don't leave the tray precariously close to the edge of a table.
Doug will break your heart. Oh. So there's a lot of good inserts out there, and really fortunate.
How about you, Dan?
I had three of my honorable mentions. 4 if you count one that I liked working on, but I didn't want to include it. But we'll get to that one. The first is Suburbia Collector's Edition. So I actually haven't seen this in person, but I was really impressed with the design. It was kind of like this masterclass of how to put a couple cool features into it. It's got that tall tower within the tray itself is the sliding action that you
I just looked at it yesterday.
Tiles. Yep. So I liked that one for that aspect. Legacy of You did something really cool with their tray, which I hadn't seen frequently, and I'm trying to push publishers to do more often, is the tray stays in the box, and it's made completely clear, and underneath, inside the box printing, shows exactly where components go. So you essentially look through the tray to see where everything is. So you get these full color images of what goes underneath the tray, or what goes inside the tray within it. And the tray stays in the box, and it becomes, it's not a big box, so it becomes the token tray at the same time. So I liked that.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than pulling out the map of how everything goes back into the box. Blueprints.
That can be a challenge. The second to last is the one I mentioned that I probably played at your house for the first time that gave me a lot of inspiration into some different types of tray lid designs, and that was Chronicles of Crime. The game itself is pretty simple and straightforward, and there's not a lot of components, but what they did with the lid was really cool. It's not a wrap over the side lid. It's just a couple button lids. And there's a couple situations that I've had where it's like, well, I could try and do a wrap over lid and it'll just make the box bigger, or we keep the box smaller and I do one of these top. And Dawn of Ulos used that same type of thing. It went a little deeper. It actually had a concave area that snapped around the inside of the tray, which is weird, but cool, and it worked really well. But Chronicles of Crime was kind of that inspiration. And the final one, which I couldn't add to the list because I worked on it and I'm just really proud of it, was Harrow County by Off the Page Games. It was another one of their deluxe version, comes with individual faction trays. So if you're going to play Kami, or if you're going to play the family, you just are given this thing, and inside it, it's got the tokens, it's got the cards, it's got the boards, it's got kind of all of it right there. And the one of the fun things I did with it is there's a tray at the bottom that holds all of either metal tokens or cardboard, depending if you get deluxe, that instead of putting a lid, I used a component from the game that is it's just a little tray. It's a cardboard, like the top of a box, but it's a little smaller. And I sized the tray so that that component is the lid. So you push it onto that and it stays in place. And so now you don't have this extra piece of plastic lid. You just take this tray off. The tray goes at the bottom of the special in the box cube tower, and so then it catches cubes as they fall out. But then that goes back on top of the token tray, and it just was a really handy dual use of those things. So those are mine.
Awesome. Now, do you have a copy of Harrow County to bring over and show us a game night sometime?
If you ever want to play it.
Yeah, I'd love to check that one out, Dan.
Let's do it.
See, it's nice to have friends with games, right?
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for joining us and bringing your expertise and making this list way better than if it was just Michael and I.
Yep.
And it does show the what a change in the last 5 years.
Absolutely.
This world has the changes that have happened in the world of inserts and what publishers and gamers are kind of expecting. So thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate that, Dan.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here anytime.
All right, we'll keep that in mind. I want to remind everybody to subscribe to the podcast or follow us on X at GameSchoolerU. If you haven't already, join the Discord, gameschooler.com/Discord. Next week, we're going to be talking about some games we wish we liked. Haven't pinned down the details on everything else yet, but thank you for spending the last hour or so with us. We truly appreciate it.
Now get out there and keep gaming.